Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ultimine 16. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for being in the chat already. I mean, yeah, it went a bit over time, but I guess that's fine. Some things happen, with technical difficulties and all that. Today's a very exciting episode because the man, the myth, the legend is back. Dr. Black, Michael Black, is back here online, and his last two uploads caused a debate online I've seen. So I thought it was a good idea to kind of catch up and talk a bit about maybe everything, because we don't really know where things might go as with all live streams. So yeah, before we get into all the stuff, Michael, it's very good to have you back here, and thank for doing this now.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, it's a pleasure as always to speak with yourself, John. And it was frankly long overdue. But it was just a case that with stuff that was going on with me in terms of house moves and whatnot, it was just mad. So I literally didn't have a space out of which I could broadcast, and I had no internet connection for months and months and months. But it's nice to be able to get back online and get back into the swing of things here. So yeah, we'll see how this podcast goes and where it takes us.
Sure.
But I'm pretty much still disconnected because I did this before I left social media and what have you. I literally just erased everything. The reason being that I was starting to notice how dangerous social media was becoming for my own mind, right? So because it's a very addictive form of mind control, really, with Facebook or Twitter or even YouTube to an extent, because it's always reinforcing this notion of your popularity or your for some people financial success and what have you. So I did this. I just literally wiped everything, the Patreon, everything. I said, look, for me, insofar as where I wanted to go in my direction with things, I didn't want it to be about money. I didn't want it to be about any sort of fame or notoriety or anything. Because those are all things that appeal to a false ego. And I'm trying to reject that rather than, embrace that. That's to me, that's sort of idiotic. It's a path to self-destruction. And I didn't want it to be anything that I do. I don't want it to be about that. In fact, I will try my damnedest to swim against the currents. And that's what people have been noticing, is that I'll say things, and I've always done this regardless of how connected I was to social media or not. I've always spoken my mind. I've never sat back and said, oh, well, just because somebody else thinks I should think this way, I'm going to think that way. No. I tend to be a very independent thinker, and I think people respect you more generally as a human being, if that's the case. But that's just a thought on my part. I don't know. But as I say, no, I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with this today.
Yeah, sure. I think our last talk was on your channel, also a live stream where we kind of talked about this, actually, the YouTube phenomenon and how these so-called, these speakers became famous, and which is fine. It's fine to be recognized for your work and for your, what you're doing for the world, essentially. But you touched on several people in the conspiracy movement, if you will, who are making well, you could say they make a fortune, by saying things that people either want to hear or that they think is going on. And we have already kind of, before this chat, we kind of talked offline what it is with these people. They kind of hammer certain things into people's mind, like this is it, and then they're going to use that ideology against that ideology. For example, it's all Marxism, it's all cultural Marxism, and you've explained in the past that, well, where does Marx come from? It's not just Marx was born and suddenly there was Marxism. It's so that So yeah, would you say that that the state of the independent thinkers, so to say, especially on YouTube, is becoming more, well, it's becoming worse, or is it more complicated to follow? You know, because everyone has something to say, and it's all kind of different opinions now, and people hang on to an ideology that they think sounds true without even going to the source. You know, I guess.
Well, there's definitely a lot of garbled communication out there on the internet today. People regularly contradict themselves, and that's because we are naturally creatures of contradiction. The reason those contradictions exist in the human being at all is because we are trying to resolve various what appear to our minds to be conflicts between the logical and the illogical, the creative and the rational. So because we're trying to navigate our way through this world where both these things exist, oftentimes we'll find or we'll come across contradictory positions, and we have a hard time resolving them. Now, the real difficulty for any person comes in when we are being fed false information or untrue information of any kind. And what this does is it bypasses the normal processes which you have for sifting through information, because you're forced to take in this new information and it sits in your subconscious for a very long time, just being nurtured and matured, because whilst the original thought is there, the very same speakers that you're talking about out there on the internet who are alternative thinkers, as they brand themselves or others brand them. And the word brand, where it comes from, that's really interesting as well, but we'll get to that perhaps later on. But these so-called alternative thinkers are then reinforcing that original thought. So you're not getting accurate information out of them. What you're getting is another system of control in many cases. And this is the thing I have warned people about consistently over the last couple of years, is this consistent, continuous attempt at control in many forms. One of the best ways to do this, of course, is to control the other end of the dialectic. Once you present one side of something, you also control what is presented to the other side, or how it is presented through your own mouthpieces. And this is precisely what's happening with these independent thinkers, or many of them at least, that are out there. Some of these people I've named by name, and we can go into that maybe even later on as well, and explore that. But a lot of these folks really are controlled opposition. People talk about what controlled opposition is all the time. They don't realize the reality behind it and why it exists and what it is there to do. It's there, to put it in simple terms, and I condensed it as much as I could in my own video. They're there to take your eye off the prize, off the real ball, okay, that is in play. The ball hasn't stopped being in play, by the way. It's constantly in play. And what is going on right now is that the people that actually run this damned world are doing their absolute hardest to make sure that you never figure out that they are there manipulating events behind the scenes. Okay, so when these massive financial crises happen, or crises happen, you never figure out that it's them, because you're too busy having bought into their propaganda, fighting amongst yourselves to ever figure it out. One group pitted against another group, right? This divide and conquer strategy is nothing new, right? It's been there for centuries. And these guys have just become masters at it. And they adapt really quickly as well, partly because the technology that we are using, and this is another rabbit hole maybe to go down either here or elsewhere, is that the technologies that we are using are actually really outdated in ways I can't even describe to people, right? This is ancient in terms of like, I'm using a computer here, or using a webcam, or using these fiber broadband or whatever else. This is ancient technology. And I don't mean that in the sense of Zacharias Sitchin or something. I'm talking about the fact that the real technology that's being developed inside DARPA, for example, or other defense contractor projects, the stuff that's being developed for these defense companies is so far beyond what you know that it would absolutely blow your mind, right? So these guys who create this technology for consumers, basically what they're doing is it's sort of like hand-me-downs with clothes. You know, when you were a kid, I don't know if you had any older brothers or sisters, but oftentimes clothes would be handed down to the next kid,
Sure.
right? So the same thing's happening with technology. You're getting this handed down technology, which to us seems marvelous. Why? Because we've never seen it before. But if you knew the leaps and bounds beyond which they have gone already, one example is quantum computing. The stuff that I was talking about 10 years ago privately to people, that's now become public, is just, you know, they're amazed by this, right? By the fact that this technology exists now. But the truth is, where they are now is yet again 20 years ahead of where they were 10, 20 years ago with, say, for example, the D-Wave machine, or they came up with the D-Wave 3 recently in terms of publicly unveiled. But where we are, as I say, is so remarkably beyond that. And yet, this basic low-tech technology that we are using, we think it's high-end. It's really not. They're using that to, again, create a system of control, right? They know how to do that because they've built in all these backdoors to target your system, to steal your data, and to do this and to do that. Of course they can do this, right? Because they are the builders of this technology. So why wouldn't they ensure that they can protect themselves against any revolutionary thought or uprising, that an authentic uprising that might ever happen? See, you don't want that if you're ruling the roost, right? Because it disturbs your shit. So what do? You prevent people from being able to get away with anything that is not under your keen, watchful eye.
Do you think there's a link between what you just said and the fact that people are now starting to ban books again? Because I've been going back to books. I mean, I have a lot of books at home, and I'm always interested in books, and not just any book, of course, but I think what's important now is, you know, go back to the actual source of something. Even with something that I believed for a lot of years, I came to some, you know, conclusion of some kind of ideology, and then that was handed down to me through these YouTube channels, you know, because they got that from someone else, and they got that from someone else. But and actually, you were one of the few, maybe the only one, I don't know, but at least one of the few people who gave sources and look this guy up and look at what he wrote, you know, and then you can understand the bigger picture, because because someone wrote some shit, you know, hundreds of years ago, and that's authentic, you know, that's their mind just in a book form. So why don't you read, you know, what they actually thought, and then come back to the internet, and then try to teach people? And do you think that's well, you know, a kind of a link between, here's the internet while we take back the books? You know?
Yeah, there is something to that, actually. This mass consumerist culture that's been created doesn't just exist with consumable items such as food or clothes or the latest iPhone or whatever. It also consists of quote unquote information. It's not actually information you're dealing with, it's just raw data that could be garbled data in real terms, insofar as what's being spread out there by people. Now, it could be good information, it could be bad information, but then you have to judge it and so on. The point I'm getting at, though, is that this desire to be constantly fed, right, to be spoon-fed information, because this is the age we're in right now. So the internet has been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows you to present anything you like to hundreds, thousands, and possibly hundreds of thousands or millions of people out there. But along with that has come something truly horrifying, which is this desire on the part of people to have what they want when they want it. And when do they want it? Now. Okay, because we've got this culture. It's not just to do with consumerism, by the way. And this is what I was talking about in my most recent video. Everything that is designed within this system, which exists, and it's a constantly evolving system, by the way. It never stops evolving. This entire thing, this artificial construct, demands of you that you sacrifice everything that is true about yourself in favor of falsehood, generating these falsehoods about you to make yourself feel better. To put it simply, the whole thing is designed to feed your ego. Okay, but can it manipulate somebody who's got a healthy ego? The answer is no. Right? So who is it catering to? It's catering to people who have an out of control, underdeveloped ego. What is the ego? I'll just tell people here on your podcast, if that's okay as well, John, because I went into this slightly myself.
Yeah, sure.
On that last video. The ego is your id, that is to say your instincts and impulses given voice. Okay, so you're dealing with your basic, most animalistic desires being given voice, and worse than that, being given a means to fulfill their wishes. Okay, egos that are underdeveloped are being given every means, every tool at the disposal of the system to feed that entity, let's call it, because the ego is it's a completely, and this is again something most people just refuse to acknowledge. It's a completely separate entity from your true self. It is there but it's necessary as well, provided that it's a healthy ego, i.e. it's an ego that's been told enough is enough. No, you can't have more. You must learn some self-control, some patience, so on. That is up to parents to do that, and they haven't. Parents have failed abysmally over the last 40 to 50 years at doing that. So we've got these out of control egos. Nobody knows now how best to deal with this. And by the way, the reason that the underdeveloped ego is so dangerous is because you end up with three types of personality at the end of all of this, at the end of this, at the end of this journey, really, that people go on. The first is that you develop into a narcissistic psychopath. Okay, and narcissism and psychopathy aren't necessarily the same thing, but oftentimes they overlap. The second is that you end up as somebody who has absolutely no wish to continue living, because you can never fill that hole inside yourself, properly or deep enough to be at one with who you are, to be at peace with yourself, right? Can never happen. So it's a constant hunger which can never be met. And some part of the superego realizes that, some part of your persona realizes that, some part of your actual mind realizes that, and it goes, I don't want to continue doing this anymore. And incorrectly, it then goes, well, now I need to end my life. This is mostly where nihilism comes from, by the way. The third possible outcome is that a human being ends up being totally emotionally and psychologically disconnected from everything that is going on around them and just ends up in a constant state of depression. Right? Now, when you look at what is happening with young people today who use technology more than any other generation ever has, you will notice these trends, these exact trends happening in terms of the behaviors that they are exhibiting. And this is all due to the fact that these underdeveloped egos have been created, they've been matured to adulthood without ever realizing what adulthood actually entails. They've not been allowed to develop spiritually or psychologically or emotionally within themselves. So this is the world we have as a result. And we are making it worse and worse by day because we're not actually addressing the underlying causes behind all of this decay and damage. It starts with the individual working on themselves. It can't start anywhere else. But yes, the technology that we have is feeding into this. People want this condensed, spoon-fed information given to them, delivered directly to their door in the way that they want it. And they also want it to confirm their own confirmation biases. They don't want to be told something that contradicts their long-held beliefs or ideas, right? Which stop being ideas at the point that they've become beliefs. They don't want to let go of any of that. Okay? And it isn't hard to indoctrinate somebody into those ideas or beliefs either. All you have to do really is, as I say, just cater to that underdeveloped ego, stroke it, massage it, make it feel wonderful, and people will buy whatever you are selling. And this is one of the problems inside the alternative media. It's one of the problems with alternative voices. It's one of the problems inside the conspiracy theory movements, is that people are just serving up all this nonsense, which merely feeds the ego. And it absolutely does not do anything to address the underlying problems which are causing the destruction of our societies around us. Societies plural.
When it comes to ego, I see that the showbiz factor that we see in the the Hollywood stuff, they bring it now into the independent world of the conspiracy research, and so whenever something happens in a world, like some event or whatever, these figureheads they jump on it, and they make this really cute, this banner, and suddenly they become these I would call them conspiracy celebrities, and they get thousands of likes and followers and subscribers, and it's just funny to me that I'm here with my humble show, and I'm trying to have interesting talks with people like you and other people, just just ordinary on the street people, and I'm too aware of the fact when I'm trying to sell out, if you will, or trying to be more interesting than I actually am, because I'm genuinely, I think, a student of life and philosophy. I don't claim to know anything, that will change the world. I just have ideas and thoughts, and I think humbleness here is something that is kind of it's not really there in that section. It's like you said in your last talk about Lauren Southern. She, I think she did some good stuff. Of course, I'm not trying to debunk her or anything, but it's just funny to see that a lot of these guys who claim that they're all alt-right and traditional, they just have the hots for her. They just become like dogs and wolves, and they just drool over her and just give her money and stuff, and suddenly she's making these really high-end films, and she has been affiliated with Rebel TV or something, and that's not a small thing, you know, to get out of. So you will almost get the idea that some figureheads are there to steer people, and that this is my next question I have for you. I think, do you think that when you talk about controlled opposition, are they that from the start, or do you think it's more likely that they have been co-opted along the way? Or
It's a lot more complicated than that. Like, if I was to tell people the reality of how this whole thing works, they would be shocked. They would be absolutely shocked, because they don't understand that they are inside. And this is why, like, I just stopped doing what I was doing for an extensive period of time, because I was banging my head against a wall trying to tell people this simple basic fact. You see, where you are living right now, okay, is a prison. I'm not talking about the earth itself. I'm not talking about the beauty of nature or the way that the universe works or the fact that there are moral or universal constraints on us as living beings, which is right and it's proper that it should be that way. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that there is a superimposed system, which is artificial in nature, that is imprisoning you, right? Worse than that, it's a filtration system. So what happens is, anyone who demonstrates any type of talent or ability, okay, because make no mistake about this, you are a number. Okay, you've already been cataloged and numbered. You are in some government database somewhere, okay, on some hard drive. They know everything about you that they could possibly know. What is my point with this? My point is, so if somebody comes along who has a hint of intelligence, or who has a hint of certain abilities, let's say, the controllers will look at that and they will say, oh, that's somebody interesting. Let's move them up in the ranks. Now, the person themselves may not even know that there is a hidden hand controlling what happens to them. Okay? But this is how it works. So you continue proving yourself, little realizing that they are not choosing or selecting at random. They're choosing, and this is how they choose and select people, by the way, who they're going to push up through the ranks. This is all information I've wanted to present to people for a long time, but there was just such resistance to it that it's almost virtually impossible to get people to grasp this. That they are choosing their own relatives. Okay, now you have to understand what that means. You see, as happens in any lineage, when you have rulers, let's take the British royal family, for example. I'm just going to use them as one example, okay? Now, they've got relatives who are commoners, or at least appear to be commoners. I was reading a story just the other week. Folks outside the UK won't know about this, but we've got a celebrity sort of here called Danny Dyer, and he came up from humble beginnings and all sorts. And he found out some time ago that he was related to Richard III. And he's a direct relation of, I think it was, sorry, it wasn't Richard III, it was, it will come back to me, but it was in all the papers anyway. So he's a direct relation of the current royal family. And he thinks that it's a coincidence that he became super massively famous. All right. Now, if you go to the Royal London College of Arms, or you go to Burke's Peerage, and you start tracing the familial lineages of all the people who have ever made it big in any industry, including show business or banking or whatever, right? You will notice they're all distant relations to the royals, right? What is my point? My point is that's just a microcosmic view. Okay, now think about what happens if you're living in a completely oligarchic system beyond that, right? Not even in a monarchy, we're living under an oligarchy, okay? And the folks who are at the very top of the pecking order, what are they doing? They're looking for their own relations to boost up. Why? Because they know something that the rest of you do not, okay? They know something, and what is that something? That is this. There is a demonstrable link which exists between you and your kin, no matter how distant, to the point where you will defend them and protect them against any onslaught. They know they can only trust their kin to back them up. That's what this whole fucking thing is all about. Okay, I'm being deadly serious about that, and people are just, you know, they're too dumb to work this out. Why? It's not their fault. They've been dumbed down. They've been made into being these slavish, useless idiots. You know, who think everything that happens out there in terms of the world of show business, Hollywood, or you know whatever else, or in the world of banking, it's all somehow accidental. It's not. None of that is. But this is what the filtration system is designed to do. It's not designed, by the way, to really help out people who are not related to the bigwigs. Okay, it's not designed to help them whatsoever. So this is the thing people have to keep in mind, I think, when examining any of this. In terms of what's happening out there. So people that are moving up even inside the world of conspiracy theories or whatever else, you know, these sub-communities, they're not ordinary folk either. They've been okayed or vetted or looked into and then double checked and whatever else, you know, before they are allowed to do what it is that they do. So people like Lauren Southern, for example, they are chosen in this way. I'm not singling Lauren out, by the way, because as you say, she's done some great work. She demonstrated some talent, right? But I'm saying that at a certain point in time, what happens is that people like that are then given these offers that appeal to, again, their own very worst aspects. So it's a constant testing ground for these guys who are the controlled opposition. How far are you willing to go? Are you going to bend this personal principle for us? Are you going to bend this rule which you have? You see, so this is how it goes on. And then eventually, once you've proven yourself completely to the system, there's another stage to this, which is completely, and this is the worst one, okay? You're completely signing over the entirety of your soul. I'm not kidding about that, by the way. There's an actual contract that's drawn up. Okay? And that contract stipulates that everything that you do, that you are, that you say, has to be okayed by the people in charge. What is that if not selling your soul?
Right. Well, that is scary, because that means that a lot of these authorities, if you can use that word, authorities in the independent community out there, at some point there's just this phone call or whatever that like, oh, we've seen you on the web, you have a lot of views and likes, but what if we can just we can give you some cash? So is that what actually happens? I mean, and if you say no, what happens then? You will get banned, or what?
Well, it depends on the person, really, because it's tailored to each individual. Different groups will reach out to different people. See, it's like, it's not a pyramid, really. You know, people have popularized this notion, and I understand why they use it. So it is a pyramidic structure, but it's worse than that, because what you've got are different groups that control other groups that can. So you've got different groups that you can choose, right? Imagine you were sitting at the top of this pyramid for a second, okay? You've got various groups that you can use to reach out to whoever you wish to reach out to. Do you see? And what happens is at first there's no mention of, oh, well, we'd like you to do this, or we'd like you to, that doesn't happen. What happens is there's just money thrown at you or popularity thrown at you, and you won't know the source of it. Okay, first of all, you will not know the source of it. So the first impression that you get is that, oh, this is all a result of your own hard work. Okay, this is the part that caters to the underdeveloped ego, right? You start to big yourself up. Oh, I'm pure dead brilliant me. Okay, then what happens? Well, then, you know, once they've got that fish hooked, then they start reeling it in a little bit at a time. Okay, just a group will make contact with an individual, and they will offer them something very small. This is how every con game works, by the way, as well. If you understand how these confidence tricks work in the world, they present them with something very small to see if there's any reciprocation. Okay, so they're giving something. It appears to the person who is in this trap that the power brokers or those representatives of the power brokers are giving them something. Thus, they feel obliged to return that favor. So they automatically, it's human behavior, it's human psychology. You automatically start thinking, well, what can I do in return for this person who has shown me support or gratitude, be it of a financial nature, be it of a psychological nature, or you know, in terms of fame or whatever else. So you automatically want to reciprocate. Then they ask something bigger of you. Then you go, yes, I'll do that. Why not? Okay, because it's just a small compromise. Okay, so each time you're asked, or you're actually choosing to. This is the worst part of it. It's not that they're forcing anyone to do anything. The person who gets caught up in these traps is choosing each time to compromise themselves little by little. This is how you get people getting trapped into these circles of control, like Molyneux, like Lawrence Southern, like Alex Jones. This is what goes on. Okay, and it just so happens that disproportionately, and there is a reason behind this, and we can talk about what that reason is, but there's a disproportionate number of people who are of Jewish heritage. Okay, and this is not an anti-Semitic thing. What I'm saying here, it's a fact. It's a demonstrable fact. Okay, statistically, Jewish people are overrepresented in every category. Now, people like Jordan Peterson, who's another controlled opposition shill, by the way, they present this idea, oh, it's due to their talents.
IQ.
IQ, right. As if there isn't such a thing as in-group preference amongst certain people, or there isn't this desire to conspire to do the best for themselves, even at a subconscious level, or their own group, or their own kinship preference. I mean, come on, it exists. Okay, so it just so happens that there's a disproportionate number of people who are of Jewish background who happen to be actually controlled themselves as well. They're in a weird sort of way, right? Although everyone points the finger at Jews, and it's right that they kind of point out the things that are wrong with this disproportionate control that Jews have over the media, have over this, have over that, the banking system, the financial system, the monetary system, the fact that Israel has a massive say in geopolitics. They can start wars, stop wars, you name it. They control America by, you know, every single avenue that they can. I mean, that is all true. But you have to also remember that the people who feel so uh, uh, in control and so powerful, well, guess what? They themselves are victims of their own ego. So, and the reason for that actually is that, see, in terms of the current iteration or the current incarnation of Judaism, it is a far cry from what it used to be. All right. With the publication of the Babylonian Talmud, everything changed for Judaism, because that happened in the 1500s, and that was due to I think it was Pope. I spoke about this some time ago, but I think it was Pope Leo X, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken on that. But in the 1500s, the Babylonian Talmud was published in collaboration with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so and what was the Roman Catholic Church? It was a continuation of the Roman Empire. What was the Roman Empire? Well, it was a continuation of the cult of Mithras. What was the cult of Mithras? It was a continuation of the Babylonian ancient deity worship. Well, what kind of deities did the Babylonians worship? Well, those that were all devoted to catering to, again, out of control, underdeveloped egos. No word of a lie. I mean, this is genuinely what it's all. You see this, and this is not to do with the fact that, you know, that this was made to happen. In point of fact, human civilizations, you find this all throughout our history, is that oftentimes cultures pop up that can't control themselves very well, who haven't nurtured their ego properly or controlled it properly, or allowed themselves to develop spiritually. So you get mass events happening like the sacrificial killings of the Incas and so forth, the Aztecs. You know, this sort of stuff goes on. Why? Because you get these pockets of cultures that pop up that don't have any reasonable self-control, and then they annihilate themselves. Well, a similar kind of thing happened in the Babylonian region, right? Which is why you see each time, it talks about the Tower of Babel in biblical scripture or whatever. Why is that seen as a horrific thing? Why is it seen as the ultimate evil? You know, the whore of Babylon and all this business in Revelations. What's that all about? The simple fact of the matter is, it was a representation, again, of the very worst aspects of society coming to the fore. Now, this has happened, as I say, time and time and time again. So it's not a new occurrence. It's just a refreshed warning, if you like, in Scripture. That's ultimately really what that's all about. But we're seeing the resurgence of Babylon. And Jews are susceptible to this, right? I'm going to just put it out there, by the way. And like I said, this is not anti-Semitic. In fact, I am fighting in defense of the Jews, right? Because they're susceptible to this, because certain aspects or elements of the Talmud are based purely in the material. That is to say, the material. It turned Judaism into a materialistic religion. Okay, and that, again, that is not a new thing, because this goes back to the time of Moses, if you believe that such a time happened. And I don't know, there's contradicting ideas about that, right? But if you remember the story when Moses went up to the mountain, right, to get the tablets, he comes back down again. What does he see? He sees that his people have melted down a golden calf and are worshipping the golden calf. Okay, so this has happened periodically, and it's not just in that culture. The reason why and this is what I'm getting at. The reason why there's an overrepresentation of Jews within this system who are contributing to not only their own demise, but the demise of the cultures which they oftentimes find themselves pushing in one direction or another, is because that is one of the few ancient cultures left. Okay, now if the Aztecs were still kicking around, I'll tell you something, we'd be talking about them in the same terms. Okay, but they wiped themselves out. Judaism and the Judaic peoples are the only ones who have managed to survive through history despite their propensity for self-destruction. Honest to goodness, I mean, this is the saving grace inside Judaism that's allowed that to happen is actually to do with the fact that certain scribes inside the Judaic religion insisted upon the incorporation of the written laws of Moses into the first written forms of the books of Moses, which you and I may know as the Old Testament. Now, they could have easily just left that out, which would have just led to Judaism collapsing in on itself. But because they left the Ten Commandments in there, right? And what are the Ten Commandments? Well, we can go through them, but the basic idea of them is to impose some form of control, self-control, not external control, self-control. That's what, see, if the Old Testament is read properly, and I'm not talking about these translated versions that you get, right? I'm talking about if you read the original Hebrew, you read the 12 books of Moses, you'll find that the original intent was very different from what it's become, which is another method of control, organized religion, where it originally started as a form of spiritual thought, which was supposed to develop the human mind for those peoples, right? But that never happened. Why? Because as we discussed, it wasn't allowed to happen. Again, certain events through history have happened with the Masada and so forth. What happened? Well, the Romans basically took over the entire Judaic peninsula. They then massacred everyone and then forced every rabbi to recreate their religion. This is the absolute truth of what did happen. See, people again aren't ready to hear this. If you want to know why Jews are overrepresented and why this desire exists to destroy other cultures, you have to understand this point, that Judaism itself became subverted very seriously. It became compromised because the scribes were murdered at the point of a sword in order to spread a religion which was utterly against the original intent. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's very interesting about the what you call the psychological makeup of Jews, because when you look at the world structure, they are, I'm saying they, but I mean the Jewish influence is in a lot of aspects of the world, and but when you highlight that as a non-Jew, you are getting attacked or you're getting censored or even jailed. And but the Jews themselves are like, yeah, we are in control. What are you going to do? I mean, so it's almost as if we are unable to educate Jews about their own history, so to say, because they have been co-opted as a what you call a race, as a so I think I think it's very dangerous that these laws are now being passed, or these bills are being passed, like that you can't even talk about that, because you're an anti-Semite. But they're not even, let's talk about Semites then. What is a Semite? So there's a whole thing that Jews themselves don't even know about. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I'll tell you why this happens as well. It's a straightforward thing. You see, if you can use a narrative of victimhood, victimology, let's call it, right? If you can force somebody to believe that they are a victim of past atrocities, which they had been, but if they internalize that, right, then what happens is that they become the ultimate vulnerable person. Now, here's something about vulnerable people. When you put somebody into a vulnerable position, people misunderstand what that word means and the outcome of it, by the way. They assume that it means that it's somebody who needs nurturing and protection and this and that. No. You don't get it. Okay? The moment you make somebody into a victim, they become the most dangerous animal that you can possibly imagine, and I'll tell you why. That happens because there's an automatic animal response, because your system then believes that there is an existential threat to your being, to your own existence. So they've been fooled into believing that this is the case in terms of the Jewish communities, right? And it's not. See, this is where people get all tangled up and screwed up in their thinking, because they don't get this. Is that there have been events through history which have targeted various populations or population groups. Okay, and you do see mass genocide happening. I talked just earlier about the Masada. That was a genocidal event through which the Romans basically took over. Right? Now, the same thing happens throughout history. Why was it, for example, that the Roman Catholic Church decided, you can read this in Shakespeare, in The Merchant of Venice, and everybody goes, oh, The Merchant of Venice is anti-Semitic. No, right? If you're looking to ban Shakespeare, you're not getting it. It's literally that simple. You know, the Catholic Church at that point had insisted upon reviling Jews and basically making war with them. Right? They were going to war with them in this very subversive manner. And the reason behind that was that, see, Jews were getting richer and richer inside Italy, inside Venice. To use that story as an example. The reason that was happening was because they had not paid attention to or paid any heed to the fact that usury was outlawed in the Old Testament. Okay, now the Roman Catholic Church had ruled that usury was illegal originally. Now they seem to be fine with it since the Vatican Bank started, funneling tons of money through the European Union and all sorts of fun things. But the point being, and not to mention the mafioso links to the Vatican Bank as well, but we won't go there. The point being that at that point in time, the Roman Catholic Church did not they were making money through these other means, right? Absolving people of their sins, and that's $10 there, right? It's always been about the shekels, no matter who's been doing it, incidentally, right? So you've got the Roman Catholic Church giving these absolutions. What were they called? These, oh, it's gone out my head now. It'll come back to me. There's a word for it. But they were giving out these paper decrees to basically absolve people of their sins for money. So that was how they were generating their income. There were also the collection plates and things that you get on Sundays anyway. There was that. So they were concentrating on that side because that was more lucrative, or at least they thought it was. But then they noticed that the Jews were making way more money. They were richer. They were far richer inside Roman society. And why was that happening? It was because the Jews had disregarded their laws about usury and started giving out loans, charging interest. And the Jews were the only ones doing this. And it was a dirty little secret because everyone inside the Roman Empire was going to the Jews for loans, but then reviling the Jews in public. This is what the Merchant of Venice, again, talks about, right? So there was this cultural lie. And what that does is when you create that kind of antagonistic relationship with any group, then there are historical injustices which can and do happen. Okay, and this is what has consistently happened with Jewish communities. But that doesn't mean that the Jews were all sweetness and light all the time. You should have a look through their history and some of the figures that have popped up that have been warriors. Okay, we had King David. People, the story of how King David went to war with Goliath, right? And that's seen as a story about a small man overcoming a small person overcoming somebody who was a giant for all intents and purposes, knocking them out with the slingshot and all that. And apparently he was a kid when that happened and so forth, thus becoming king of Israel. But the thing is that, Jewish history is also full of war and bloodshed and this and that. That's not missing from it. Nobody, no culture was ever without, because this is the thing I was saying to you the other day as well, John, is that human beings have been massacring each other for tens of thousands of years. Okay, so we've all been at it, and there are consequences for these kinds of things, and the consequences go from one generation to the next. They're inherited almost sometimes, you know. There is some truth to the notion that we inherit the sins of our fathers, you know, not in the literal sense, but I'm talking about the fact that oftentimes we do live with the consequences of what was done before. It's a straightforward, simple thing. But this is why, so the point being that you can actually skew the view of history for one group or another group and make them believe that they are perpetual victims, rather than realizing that, hang on a second, they can take control of their own destiny and not be servile or not be in servitude to the pyramidic structure which exists, which is looking to enslave everyone, not be a part of that, not contribute to that, instead to stand up against that. And there are Jews who do, by the way. This is what is so fascinating, is like not every Jew out there is going to insist on joining in with the calamity of this self-destruction and the destruction of others. Not every Jew joins. Like you'll see, for example, even inside Israel, there are plenty of Jews, Orthodox and otherwise, who stand up and say, hey, we're not okay with Israel going and doing this to the Gaza Strip. Okay, we're not okay with Palestinians being made second-class citizens, which happened with the nation-state laws that Netanyahu brought in. We're not okay with that. So you do get Jews of conscience who stand up and are counted. But also, I mean, again, we can't ignore the fact, as I was saying, that there is disproportionate representation, and an overwhelming number of them do gravitate towards authoritarianism. Something very similar is true of people that we would say are neocons, right? These Christian neoconservatives. What's that all about? Why do those what are those folks all about? Because hang on a second, we all thought that Zionists were only Jewish. No, in fact, the greater number, I would say, of people involved in this problem are actually not true Christians, but they would call themselves Christians.
Well, it's actually what Joe Biden said. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. So there you go. and there's another thing I would like to say before I forget, because this thought was just going through my mind the whole time. It's like, especially Jews who, on the one hand, they say we're the victim of this and that. We're always the victim, but at the other hand, they brag about their influence. And there's a definite, there's a thing to that when you say that you're a victim, but that can also mean that you have control over people who you think have been victimizing you. So so Netanyahu, he had a lot of speeches bragging about how Israel's the biggest in this and that, and look, we're just a small country, and we look at this, we've got all this control, but we're victims though. So don't you forget that. It's really annoying to kind of to kind of hear the whole time. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's contradictions. This is what I was talking about. There's contradictions presented at every turn for the sane mind, because, like I said, this whole thing's designed to drive you insane. Okay, this whole system is designed to drive you insane. And if you somehow manage to retain your sanity, they'll find some other way of getting to you. And they're not beyond using mystical means I'll just say that and leave that there as well. They're not beyond using certain levels of knowledge that are probably not they're probably not even registering to most people out there, really. See, there's a higher level to existence. And I don't want to freak people out by talking about this too much, because they won't get it unless they, this is what I've said from day one. Unless you have personally experienced something, you have no business talking about that thing, particularly when it comes to spiritual matters. Okay, all these people that talk about God, my first question to them is, have you ever seen God, or have you ever experienced God? If the answer is no, then kindly sit down and shut up. Okay, because if you don't understand what it is to know, to have true gnosis about a thing, what can you you could describe? So like this is what I always say to people. It's like we were talking about books and the internet, for example, earlier, right? There's another step as well prior to that, though, which is you can gather all the knowledge you like from books about plants and flowers, okay? But if you've never seen a plant or flower, or never actually held one in your hands or smelt a flower, okay, then all you have is potential information about the flower, but no experience upon which to base the importance of that flower to you. There's no personal connection to flower. Flower is just a random thing out there that may exist. This is why we talk about people being book smart and street smart. Okay, you can have all the smarts in the world or all the knowledge from books that you like, but if you haven't lived in something, if you haven't lived through something, you know, this is part of the reason why experiential wisdom is so necessary in people's lives. And we're losing that, by the way, because the rites of passage that kids had to go through before and all sorts of things, they're falling by the wayside, right? Those rites of passage are important because they do help you to understand the necessity of controlling impulses and instincts, but also they give you direct experiential wisdom, like being left out in the woods to survive for a day. You know, fathers used to do that, just leave their sons out there in the garden or in the woods or somewhere, and just say, okay, now you have to make fire, or you have to do this, you know, this kind of thing. And they would learn very valuable life skills. Well, if you ask kids today, let's leave aside making fire out of two sticks, right? If you ask kids today simple things like, where does your food come from? They'll say supermarkets. They don't even make the proper connection to what their food is. So they don't even know what they're eating. Right, so we're becoming more and more disconnected, and we're ripping apart, ripping away the important parts of experiential wisdom and replacing them with something that passes for knowledge, something that passes for intellect, but really probably isn't.
Yeah.
You know. Sorry, what were we talking about there? I've gotten off track there.
About Jews, but this is fine.
No, the point being that, yeah, I mean, the victim complex,
Yeah.
it can develop inside anyone in any group, and then it becomes the worst enemy of that person as well, because you're made to feel constantly inferior. Therefore, bizarrely enough, you actually develop a superiority complex.
Yeah, that is what I was trying to say, that, you know, they are victims and superior at the same time. But what you said about the direct experience, you know, with a flower or something. What if you you know, had such a deep, intimate experience with a flower, you wouldn't even want to write about it anyway. And I was like, well, the words fail to explain what I just felt, and you just have to experience it yourself. So, but now, yeah, that's the whole thing, that the people use others, words just to kind of define what they think it is, and that's really what's happening. And that kind of reminds me of what I read in Robert Bly's book about how the son or the daughter in these times doesn't know what the father is doing, when he's at work. All he sees is the father is coming back from work all annoyed and moody, and then he beats his wife and stuff. And so the generation after the father's generation, they don't have a clue what the world is all about. So and that's because I'm not trying to say that it's the father's fault, but it's just society's fault, how things are being structured, as you say, in a kind of this jail-like structure. So that's why kids are really ignorant, really, and it's not mostly not their fault, but they don't have direct experience with the world, as you said, when you ask them, how does your food come from? Well, where does your hamburger come from? It's from the supermarket. No, it's from a cow, actually. Oh, do cows grow in the supermarket? No, they live in they live outside, and you have to kill the cows first. So the source is kind of gone, and people are on a grand scale are trying to, I think, go back to some kind of source. I don't know, because we all seem very lost.
Well, we're lost because we know something is wrong. It's that simple. We know that there's something wrong with the world outside, but we can't put our finger on it and say, well, this is what it is, or that's what it is. And the majority of people can't do that because they've been prevented from knowing. Okay, the knowledge has been sequestered, if you like, for a very long time now, probably at the very least for the last 200 and something odd years. Like the stuff I've been presenting on my channel, right? We were just briefly touching on this earlier. It shocks me, okay? It shocks me that a lot of the information that I've presented has never been presented before. Whether it's information on the Fabian Society, whether it's on the information on the creation of this current incarnation of Islam, whether it's information on the creation of the current incarnation of Judaism that we were talking about earlier as well, whether it's to do with cultural Marxism, whether it's to do with Russia and how that played in with the Soviet Union into things, and how it's still a major player in the grand chessboard in this great game now, whether it's to do with China, whether it's to do with Israeli interest in China and Russia, right? None of this was presented prior to my coming onto the YouTube platform, and that absolutely shocked me. It shocked me because these were things that should have been spoken about before. Now, as a result of me going out there and doing a lot of what I did do with the work that I put out there, suddenly people are popping up left, right, and center starting to talk about these things. And that makes me happy. But it's something that should have been done before I even came about, before anyone even knew who I was. Okay, that's the thing that irritates me, is that all these so-called purveyors of information, I mean, in fact, there's only one person, well, two, right, who have presented anything similar to the level of knowledge or information that I have disseminated out there. And I say that not from an egotistical perspective, but from a perspective of absolute sheer disappointment and sadness, because this information is available. And if these purveyors of alternative media facts or whatever really wanted to do some good, all they had to do was come along and do what I've done.
Yeah, but you have to know where you start, in the whole searching for truth, because a lot of people now, especially, they get it from people on the internet, and they got it from people on the internet. And you're actually right when you said that you are one of the very few people who started to give sources that no one has ever heard of, including me. And I think therefore you are one of the more the knowledgeable on there. And my question then is, and by the way, I'm also very honored to have this talk with you, because I just feel like I'm a student and you're kind of a teacher, but I would like to have just a conversation with about all this, because would really like to know everything that there is to know. So, and you've helped me extremely. So I want to thank you again, just for now. And but my question is, have you been approached, without going into detail, by certain organizations to kind of to make you sell out or anything? If you want to answer that.
Sure, I'll answer it. Yes. The simple answer is yes. I've been approached multiple times, and each time, see, I'm glad you brought this up, okay? Because this is why I have such an intimate knowledge of how this nonsense works, okay? So, yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of occasions where that's happened, and the people that I've said no to, they're really frustrated with me right now. I'll tell you that much. Like, this is why there's such a coordinated effort to shut me down. Okay, and there has been from day one, which is why I have to admit I did scale back my activities when I realized that these guys were serious. But the thing behind that, though, is that I am not motivated, and this is what freaked them out. I am not motivated. You cannot buy me with appeals to my intellectual vanity. You cannot buy me monetarily. Okay, I don't see any value in money. See, if I'm honest, if I'm absolutely blatantly honest with you, I cannot see the inherent value in a piece of paper or a shiny piece of metal. I just don't see it. And that's partly because I spent a very great deal of time studying under spiritual masters in India and at Buddhist monasteries. I kid you not. So my worldview, my way of looking at the world, is very different to most people's. And this is why a lot of folks would get a shock if they understood or realized how I live. Because I live a very simple life. Okay? I can't say that I haven't enjoyed life, right? I can't say that I haven't had the money to enjoy life. I've made more than enough in my time. I've had plenty of opportunity to see the joys, if they're properly approached, of balancing materialism with true living, with the joy of living in a proper sense. But at the same time, I don't see the inherent value of currency or monetary things. I can't see somebody who's in that mindset. For me, trying to understand that is impossible. All right, I just can't process it. Similarly with this, and I've told you this in private conversation, but I'll make this public, and you can tell people as well if you wish. I mean, this is a fact. I have been trying to get rid of subscribers. Okay, I don't want fame. I've been trying to offload subscribers to other channels by recommending them, because I don't want to be known in such a massive sense or something. I don't want to become like Alex Jones. I don't want to become like Jordan Peterson. I don't want to do that. Why? Because I refuse to sell out. I don't want also because fame itself comes with an extreme burden, I think, because you feel you have to live up to the expectations of other people and what they want you to do. So I've purposefully shunned fame, fortune, you name it. I've just refused point blank to do this. What I'm saying here is that this has confused these people that have approached me with various offers. Okay, they've gotten the shock of their lives because I've just gone, no, I won't do that, or no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with what you're saying, or whatever else. So they get this massive shock to their system because they don't expect people, they assume that if you've been indoctrinated by their system, you've lived inside their system, to some degree you must have been, and I'll admit it is true to a very small degree, because otherwise I wouldn't be out there on YouTube. But what motivates me is not the clicks or the likes or the shares or all this garbage. What motivates me is putting the information out there. So it was a struggle because I had to question myself before I even came on the platform. I had to question myself whether my motives were truly authentic or not. That was agonizing. I went through about 2 months of that, just questioning whether or not it was worthwhile, whether or not I would be able to stay the course and not get dragged into the money game or the fame game. You know, it was very tough, but in the end, I did decide to do it because I felt that it was important to make some effort to push back against this whole damn thing, rather than just sitting silently by the sidelines. I couldn't do that. But yes, I mean, there have been, of course, there have been groups that have tried to approach me. Of course, there have been people that have tried to co-opt me. They always present really interesting ways in which, you can become something or you can do something, or all this. But I don't want that. I don't want that.
Yeah. I assume you don't want to name names, but has your life been harder after that? And what do they say when you decline their offer?
They don't say anything. They just say, thank you. Okay, we understand that. Go on your own merry way. They don't threaten you or anything. They don't say anything overtly, disturbing or whatever. That's never happened. Instead, what's happened is my life, yes, has gotten harder as a result, directly. So, I've gone from, in the last 3-4 months, I've gone from one swanky apartment to the next. That's happened as a direct result of my saying no to some very influential and powerful people. I've said I refuse, and they have in turn sort of turned the screws. Similarly, there have been things that I've tried here and there, not very successfully, but things have been tried to prevent me from speaking. I had a visit from the police at one point over something. It was not very major, but it was just kind of one of those warnings, as it were. So yeah, stuff has been done, things have happened, and even so, I'm not perturbed by it because I assumed that would be the case. So I don't get disturbed by these things. I refuse to use any or initiate any kind of physical violence against anyone. And so therefore, they tend to realize that this is not a guy who's going to do anything. He's not a nut. He's not crazy. He's, just speaking very rationally and sanely about things. And they tend to just ease off after that. But honestly, I don't know how far things could go. I don't know what might be done to me in the future. And I'm not worried about that, though, either. That's the thing. Like, say something, in the worst case scenarios, what they've done is you get people that are killed for putting information out there, right? Even if that happens to me, okay, even if that, I'm not going to be concerned about that. Now, there are deep reasons behind that, but I'm not going to go into those here. I'm just going to make the point that I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm not afraid of having no money. I'm not afraid of having no house. I'm not afraid of any of these things.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually what they expect you to be afraid of, right? So they can use that as a kind of, well, maybe you can lose this or that, but so it kind of sounds like it's the opposite then. Like they let you go, they let you do your thing as long as you're upfront about it, or because it kind of sounds like
because this is exactly what it is. This is the reason why I've been telling people you just need to learn how to say no.
Right.
Because they can't do anything. What's the worst that they can do? make you a non-person. They can kill you. They can take away your Google account. They can shut down your bank accounts. Say they do all of that, and they have tried to do some kind of similar things to other people, right? People have been, it's not just the deplatforming thing. It's like you've got credit card companies like MasterCard shutting people's accounts down and all sorts of business. Say they do all of that. So what? Okay, you need to be, here's the thing, that people aren't mentally ready to get into this fight, and they jump in not realizing how serious the fight actually is, and it's a psychological one. But you have to prepare yourself completely and utterly for every worst case possible eventuality that could happen to you when you go out on this battlefield of information. Okay, and then if it happens, you're ready for it, and you don't fear it. Then you become stronger as a result. You grow from that experience and you go forward, right? And that's the point at which you really start scaring the pants off them. I haven't gotten to that stage myself yet. Okay, but if I do, then that will be the point where they start shitting their pants. You know, because there are people that have gone up there and been able to do that, do immense damage like that, and I've just been in awe of that. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. The future is an undiscovered country.
Right. There is someone in the chat who wants to ask you something. So maybe if you have time still to kind of answer this one. Somebody says, let's see, I'm looking on my phone for this one. What are the chances this conflict in Syria was all planned, even between Israel, Assad, and Russia and US? All of them? Was it all planned or not?
Yes and no. It was to some degree. The basics were agreed in principle. But the overall picture, nobody ever really knows how something is going to play out. I mean, they do these simulations in the Department of Defense and, you know, the equivalents in Israel or in Russia, the FSB or the military wing there. They run through these simulations. Some of them are computer simulations. Most of the time, they're actual participatory simulations. And what happens is they come out with all these possible outcomes to what might happen. And so then they can game it through. Now, any intelligent person, of course, would do that. And this is what these governmental departments inside these countries do. They try and make sure that the result that they want, the sequence of events plays out so that that is what they get. They're lucky 99% of the time. There are moments where they're not, but they do get lucky most of the time. In terms of what happened with Syria, yes, well, it wasn't planned with Assad being a major part of it. He's a lowly pawn in this, in a real sense. He's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. With Golan Heights, for example, I don't know if people caught what Trump did there.
Yeah.
But declaring that territory to be the property of Israel is a really dangerous thing to do, because that region is so unstable that it could literally kick off like anyone's business, and they wouldn't know what hit them. The Israelis are not kidding around either about what they want. They're after the Golan Heights for one very specific reason, and that's to do with the gas reserves there. I mean, it's literally that simple. But was it planned? I would say it was more coordinated than planned. And then it just happened to game out exactly the way that the US and Israel wanted, and Russia was quite happy with that as well, because Russia's problem right now is that it doesn't want to take on the extra burden of Syria when Iran is currently being threatened. So the Russians don't know whether to protect the Iranians or whether to protect the Syrians, and so they're thinking it's okay if they give up part of the Syrian region, just so long as it isn't the region in which ISIS is operating, you know. So it's very up in the air in regards to that, and anything could happen. But yes, there was definitely coordination between all the major nations to ensure that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, the whole land taking that Israel does, and now in that whole, that's it has been written about, I think, a lot. And isn't that the Oded Hinon plan? That they want to confiscate a certain amount of land there. So do you think that's still that this is also what we're seeing?
Yes and no. I mean, the Oded Yinon plan is a clever piece of. It's true, but it's also a clever piece of propagandist nonsense to get the Israelis to buy into some idea of a greater Israel. The actual plan is so horrific that if you really got a grasp of it, you'd realize that it's about obliterating Israel at the end of the day as well. See, this is what the Israelis don't realize. That's why I'm always criticizing them. It's why I'm criticizing this notion of Jewish supremacy or whatever else. Is because they don't realize that they are actually going to end up being the sacrificial lambs in all of this at the final stage. Because the people that really run this world, what they want is it's not a secular society that they want to create. It will be religious in nature. Only people will be worshipping something far more evil than they realize, and it's not going to be good. There are going to be massive human sacrifices demanded as a result. I'll just say that point blank. And the destruction of Israel is necessary for that. But the way to get the Israelis on board is just to say, well, here's this thing, right? The Greater Israel Project. If you go along with us, we'll give you all this land and all this territory to expand in, so you get your precious expansionism. You see? So it's a very clever ploy. It hasn't gotten to the end stages yet, so Israel will be given more land over time before it is obliterated. And the same thing actually will happen with the Iranians as well. See, you're going to have a situation where there's a mutually assured destruction of both countries. And the Middle East is going to end up in a massive maelstrom that it can't ever get out of.
Yeah, it's also very interesting to look into the city of Neom in Saudi Arabia, right? That they, and especially Israel with all their tech stuff, they're going to build this mega futuristic AI city that's interlocked with everything. So there's a lot of things going on in that area of the world. So it's really interesting to delve into that, and maybe that's just too big for this show. But I would like to go into that with you some other time as well, maybe, if you would like, because I am doing a show with Mike Thompson about all this, and but everything seems to be about that now. But it's also behind the scenes because no one is really talking about it, but we're seeing the effects of it, and that's another thing that's just interesting. Because, and what are your thoughts, by the way, of Trump and his what he's doing with this, with APAC, and how he's kind of their their lapdog right now? I mean, do you see that happening? I guess you
Well,
do.
yeah, absolutely. I've been catching up with things over the last week because, as I say, I've had no internet access for many, many months. But in terms of Trump, he is doing what he has to do in order to survive politically. I mean, he's being as pragmatic about this as anyone can be. If he's not their lapdog, he'd have been indicted. See this Mueller report that came out, by the way. And this is why I said to everyone many months ago, and I got slammed for this from every side, because I guess people have noticed I'm not shy about saying what is in fact true. And I told people that Mueller was not going to indict Trump, that Mueller was actually going to produce a report that would concur with the fact that there had been no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Okay, I made this point. And I got so much pushback because what was happening was the polarization stuff that I've been talking about for a long time as well. People are split into these different political camps, and you've got the people on the right, the Trump supporters, who were absolutely fuming that the Mueller investigation had been allowed to happen, and they were fuming at Mueller. They were like, oh, he's going to find, because everybody knows secretly Trump's got fucking skeletons up the ass, right? I mean, pardon the profanity, but it's the truth, right? This guy has done so many shady things. It would be a miracle. And that's exactly what has happened, in fact. It's a miracle that they haven't found anything.
Right, yeah. Well, he has been bailed out as well, right? In '99 by Rothschild's banker, something Ross. So yeah, his name is worth a lot still. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, Trump, he's done some really good things, but at the same time, for the sake of surviving, because he could. This is not a man. You have to understand something about Trump, okay? It's not that he's doing it out of evil necessarily. He's doing it out of a necessity to preserve his own family, because Jared Kushner, who's married his daughter Ivanka, and Kushner and Netanyahu, and everybody hopefully knows about all this business, right? Saks, 666 Fifth Avenue, all this popularized truth. These are facts. But he has to do this in order to survive. He's a metropolitan guy. Okay, Trump is a metrosexual. Right, I hate to break this to people. People, he's an alpha male, you know, and oh, he's got hair on his chest. No, this guy is a complete metrosexual individual who has grown up in the most privileged positions, in the most privileged schools and what have you. He's always been pampered. Okay. What is my point with this? Is this to bash Trump? No. My point is this: could such a man survive inside prison? No. So of course he's going to bend over. Okay, of course he's going to bend over, because see, to survive prison, like I'll tell you this. I am a man, and I'm not going to go into this too much. I am a man who could survive prison. That is why I am not afraid of going to jail either for speaking the truth. A lot of people get freaked out. Oh my God, they could censor us. They could come to our house. They could arrest us. I am fully prepared for that. Okay. In fact, I want you, if you dare, those folks out there, right, that pull the strings and they know who they are. I want you to come and arrest me. Okay. They won't do it. All right. But if they did, I would be fully prepared for that outcome. I'm prepared for prison. There is no other way. I'm prepared for every single eventual outcome, as I was saying earlier. Trump himself is not. He's not mentally prepared, because what prison does to a man, okay, who has not ever, you have to remember, Trump's always been surrounded by people. All right. In prison, you have to cope with solitude. You have to cope with the fact that all of your freedoms are curtailed. You don't get your luxuries. You don't get anything like that. So if all of that isn't there, a lot of people can't handle that. And Trump is one of those people who can't handle it. He's terrified of that. So of course he had to give in to the Zionist control mechanisms that are in play as part of this bigger, greater game. Of course he had to. So yeah, I mean, Mueller was never going to indict him. He was never going to indict him as long as Trump just kept jumping through the hoops.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point about that. Yeah, about being fearless about the things that they are going to threaten you with. You know, so because you're a man that doesn't have anything to lose, which makes you in a way very rich. So you already have everything you want. You know, you have got your sovereignty, your mind, your soul. So I think that's yeah. So that's a very good point. And maybe to kind of, I think we should kind of wrap this up by now. Maybe for a last last bit of talk that we do now. Do you have any uplifting thoughts for humanity? Because I named this talk "Darkest before dawn. So because we talked about that offline a bit, like we are already in these dark times, but there's also this other thing that always kind of is there. There's hope. There's kind of some sort of awakening. I'm not trying to say that this in a kind of new age sense, because the very fact that we're talking about things that are going on and we reach audiences does mean that there is a willingness to learn and to be to uplift yourself in the first place. So what would you say to kind of end this show, as a advice or whatever?
Well, my final thoughts on it all would be this. Humanity is not finished. It's not going to be finished. And the people that are responsible for the current state of humanity are going to lose. I can tell you that as well, by the way. They can't win. They just don't know this yet. But then here's the other thing. I must tell you this before we go. The rulers of this world have no intention of doing anything so prosaic as winning. Their entire purpose is to exist and to keep man's inhumanity to man perpetuating. So what you have to do as a human being is to holistically align yourself with yourself internally, all those different voices within you. You have to unify those. You have to go through the process of inner unification, and then you can begin to make a dramatic difference externally as well. But it starts with you. And guess what? That is going to happen. This is why I'm saying, see, it's not so much necessarily that people are going to create this awakening phenomenon or what have you. That's not going to be the case. Evolution is already at work. See, the stuff that I was saying about the ego, it's there for a reason. The ego is there for a reason, right? And that's to take us to the next stage of human evolution, which is actually the development of our mental faculties. And by the way, when you use the word mental in that context, mental faculties, people think you're talking about just the logic and the ability to compute. No, no, no. Your mental faculties are everything that your brain is capable of, including the creative expression, including being able to be empathetic, including every single subset of every area within your brain has a function. So when the next step in human evolution happens, then automatically what's going to happen is that these people who have constructed the artificial construct, it will fall apart before their very eyes, just through nature. Okay, this is the thing. I'm not saying that it's going to happen magically or something. No, no, people are going to put in effort to do many a thing, but that in turn is also part of the natural process. The more people suddenly start to switch on, the more you're going to find that, hang on a second, they're not putting up with a lot of nonsense from here or there, or all these constraints on the mind, or being told what they should think, or, once they grasp the basics of it, of how this manipulation and control is done, they'll be throwing off the shackles like anyone's business, and it's going to happen pretty rapidly as well. So we've got maybe maximum, I would say, 50 years of uncertainty and self-destruction and hedonism and all this sort of business. In 100 years, 200 years, I genuinely do think that human beings will be able to completely free themselves from a lot of this nonsense, because that penny will finally drop, and then they will be free. The only question at that point becomes, what will you do with your freedom? I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, very well said, and I believe that is true. Yeah, but I mean, it's when you look at things in cycles. I mean, this is what is bound to happen in my view. But we have to be aware of what's happening now and not turn away from the bad stuff, because that can ultimately enslave us even more. So as you say, I think you're an example of a sort of attitude that you should have towards the world and towards the powers that should not be. So I guess that's a very good thing to end this talk on. And just want to thank you again for being back online, and first for, after a long time, but just for talking with me about these things. And I'm really honored to have this talk with you, and I hope we can do it again sometime. And but for now, just thanks again for this.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I'm sorry I couldn't go through all of your questions, but it's kind of hard to do two things at the same time. But maybe another time we can go into that. But thanks, everybody, and see you soon.